Let's go to the Boss Firearms Hotline. We are joined by Paul Finebaum of the SEC Network and, of course, ESPN. Paul, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great and really excited about coming out to Aggieland this weekend.
Well, yeah, go ahead. I'll say you guys picked a good one. It looks like that, as usual, SEC Nation timing is good. 11 a.m. I feel like every time y'all get it, it's 11 a.m. game starts. This is all of a sudden shaped up to be a pretty important game for both teams, is it not?
Yeah, no, it is. And you know, there's a lot of debate about Missouri, whether they look beatable or not. They do look beatable, and I think that's really a tremendous advantage for the Aggies, who have started to put together a really nice season, Billy. And I'm fired up about it because you can't help but like Mike Elko and want this program to finally have a good run, which it has not had in too long.
You know, Paul, I'll tell you where I sit right now with this team is I don't feel like they've shown anything on the field to go and get attention outside of College Station. They've beaten an Arkansas and Florida team. I don't think either of those will go bowling. But I think you guys and people that cover the SEC, it's been enough to kind of like get your attention, it feels like, to say, man, I'm really interested to see how this goes this weekend, because Missouri, like you said, everybody kind of waiting to see if they're real or fraudulent. And A&M, the last time most people really paid attention, we're losing to a top 10 team at home. And they're kind of fortunate, I feel like, all of a sudden you look up 4 weeks later and they're getting another crack at it.
But, Billy, I remember we did our show in Florida, so I was really plugged into that. And, you know, when we heard about Wegman, everybody kind of held their heart. And that was somewhat of a do-or-die stand for Billy Napier. And it just felt like that Aggie team was getting into the wrong stadium that day. And to me, that win really meant a lot. It was able to wash away some of the pain from Notre Dame, and I think it enabled the program to really get on the right footing. And I think we saw that Saturday in Arlington.
Paul, when you look at this A&M team, they were 4-1 last year, and they had come off a victory over Arkansas as well. But do they look like a different team to you, that maybe one that has figured it out potentially in the fourth quarter? Because there were a lot of tight games last year.
Yeah, no, I remember we were out there, I think, for the Auburn game, and then I believe in Ole Miss for what was the undoing. So I saw that team a lot, and it just never felt right. It felt like smoke and mirrors. But then again, that was one of the trademarks of the previous administration.
Yeah, I'm trying to break down this game, and Missouri's a tough one, right? They struggled double overtime with Vandy, struggled against BC, but you know that skill position talent. When you look at the Aggies right now, what would this win mean for Texas A&M? Because I think Missouri, while I don't kind of view them as a top 10 team, I think they're a real opponent. I think they're a top half of the SEC football team. If A&M can win this, and you look at that schedule moving forward, Paul, what do you see when you see Mississippi State, LSU coming to Kyle Field, Auburn, South Carolina, games like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a major swing game, Billy. I was probably higher on Missouri. I was on First Take about 2 weeks ago, and I was talking about Missouri being a playoff team, and Chris Russo, Mad Dog, just started laughing out loud. And I mean, I didn't really want. I mean, it was like, do I really waste a lot of airtime on ESPN defending a team I'm not sure I believe in, or do I let him laugh? So I let him laugh, and I felt pretty good about it when I saw the Vandy game a couple of days later, because they just don't look like a top tier team. They're capable of it, and we all know that from what we saw last year. But they had a pretty easy schedule, and this is to me their first real test. And I mean, at the moment, I really feel good about the Aggies because if they can get by this game, I mean, Mississippi State speaks for itself. And then, you know, LSU at home, listen, LSU looks incredibly beatable on the road. And then South Carolina and Auburn. I mean, we may be talking about a seriously good run here. And I know I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm the same guy who in July, Billy, predicted Auburn would go into Athens this weekend undefeated.
I want to talk to you about Auburn and a couple of SEC teams before we go, Kind of last one on A&M, and you're watching it from 30,000 feet level, which I think is valuable for us here in College Station just to talk to you guys. And so I'm always look forward to y'all coming in on the weekends here, but just to get kind of that across the board feel. But for you, Paul, what have you seen? Like David said, the record's the same. It looks and feels different. Not to say that there's a playoff run in this team yet, but just in terms of 4-1, what does it look like to you that seems to be the biggest difference with Mike Elko at the helm?
Well, to me, he's just a smart, deliberate guy who seemingly has everything under control. And for all of Jimbo's brilliance, and by the way, I mean, there was a lot. You know it better than anybody, Billy. I mean, this guy at times was borderline genius. It was never stable.
Yeah.
And I think because of that, I feel much better about the program today. It looks like you've gone out and hired a CEO who doesn't need doesn't need anybody around him to steer him in the right direction, and I think that pays off. And I've been to I mean, we're now in the 6th week of the season. I've been to Auburn. I've been to Kentucky. I've been to Florida twice. I've seen haves and have-nots, and the Aggies feel like a have right now. They're not a playoff team, but they could be. I mean, it's not inconceivable, and I think that's important to factor in at this point. So I really do like everything about the program. I don't know as much about the new administration with Trev Alberts as I did with Bjork and Woodward before them. But I know one thing about the leadership on that campus. It's top notch, and from the president, I had a great chance to meet the general last year. As you know, Billy, I've been coming there a long time. Porter Gardner, who heads the students, the Association of Former Students, to me is one of the great leaders in intercollegiate athletics. So I really feel like that entire operation is top notch.
Paul, by the way, the thing about Elko, too, that you left out is he's got that Northeast Jersey, New York savvy that you and I share as well. So we can't leave that out of it, Nuno, something that you don't know anything about.
We didn't get that from West Virginia, Jimbo.
Hey, Paul, I do want to ask one other A&M thing. When you look at that defensive line, for a couple of weeks, they were close, right? But they weren't getting the numbers we were expecting. Now they're starting to do that. How do you think that translates against a Missouri offensive line that's kind of been suspect and Brady Cook, who can move a little bit, but not the way Taylor Green moves?
No, I think it gives A&M an advantage there. And Missouri, to me, seemed like a team going in was maybe a little overhyped. I mean, yeah, you got to respect Brady Cook and Luther Burden and a couple of other factors there, but I just don't come away feeling great about that program. I think they've been able to skate, and I mean literally skate, with an easy schedule. And when BC is your big non-opponent, and by the way, I mean I think of Bill O'Brien kind of in a similar way as I do Mike Elko. I mean, two really bright guys, from different sides of the ball, but who have been around some of the best. And Drinkwitz to me is still someone that I haven't landed on yet as far as an elite SEC head coach.
Paul, you've seen a ton of games at Bryant-Denny Stadium. You've seen a ton of classics around the SEC. I can only assume that Georgia-Bama last weekend rates way up there. Just real quick, give me your take on what we saw take place Saturday and what that meant to Kalen DeBoer and that program. And then also earlier in that day, what that loss meant for Lane Kiffin and conversely the former Aggie head coach, Mark Stoops.
Yeah, for a minute.
Yeah, about a minute.
I think for DeBoer, I mean, it was significant because it really nobody's pushing Nick Saban aside. I mean, we all know he's very present or omnipresent. But DeBoer finally got out of the Saban shadow because he did what it used to be you have to beat Auburn.
Yeah.
That's no longer a factor. And I'll get to Auburn in a moment. But beating Kirby Smart really matters because only Nick Saban has beaten Kirby Smart. And now he's done that. And yeah, I mean, I got caught up Sunday morning on TV and said it's the best SEC game I've seen in 40 years. It was in many respects. I mean, it's just for pure entertainment. There have been more consequential games, obviously. And I won't bore your audience with them. In fact, frankly, the game that I'll never forget as long as I live was Johnny coming into there in 2012. I mean, that was just one of the most stunning outcomes I have ever seen. But it was consequential. As far as Ole Miss, that was a Manhattan phone book to the gut of Lane Kiffin, and he still hasn't. He's been very quiet on social media, been very quiet texting his friends, as you know, Bill.
TikToks.
I don't think Lane Kiffin knows what to say, because that could have been a career-defining loss. And I know that's presumptuous, but I thought they were a sure playoff team. I thought maybe we had not given them enough credit. And losing to Stoops, who's just so easy to overlook. And by the way, Mark Stoops does a lot of that to himself. South Carolina game this year, always a game like that. But that really, I mean, Lane now has a very tricky path back, which is bad news for Ole Miss. It might be good news for Florida, because having been down there a couple of times, the fans and the boosters want Lane Kiffin to be the next coach. I don't know about the administration.
Paul, let me ask you about South Carolina this weekend then, because they're a team that, I mean, they keep surprising me. Do you think they have another play here against Ole Miss?
I don't, but they're capable, and there's still a few things that aren't perfect. I mean, they've taken some real water, losing in terms of losses already with Sellers and some of the other players. But that is one of those stadiums, as you guys know, because you've been there. You can find a little bit of magic on Saturday, and you just don't know about Lane Kiffin coming off of this loss, because with LSU next week, I mean, this becomes the ultimate sandwich game, even though it really shouldn't be, because they should have beaten Kentucky.
Well, I guess we'll close it out with a little talking about our favorite topic, but I'm going to throw a change up here, the Longhorns. My big disappointment right now in Texas, and this is no shade because A&M has gotten a really favorable draw from the SEC schedule makers this year as well. But Texas, my one gripe right now about Texas watching them is, you mentioned Ole Miss, and between Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Alabama, with those offenses and the way the Texas Longhorn offenses look so far, the Longhorns against any of those three teams, I think we get an Alabama-Georgia type game, and we're going to miss out on that this year. When you look at that Longhorn schedule, Paul, because I don't think they've been tested yet. I think Michigan, they've played a lot of teams that can't score points. When you look at that schedule, because they do look like a top three team without question, who do you see on there that's a threat? If you had to circle a game or two where you said this could be a slip up because you've watched SEC football your whole life.
Yeah, I mean, I'll skip the Georgia game because it's self-evident.
Yeah.
But there was a moment in the season that I wondered about Arkansas, but I'm taking that one off the board. But I'm not playing to the crowd here, Billy, because I said this in July with you. It's always been the A&M game. That to me has always been my secret fantasy game of the year. I want to be there that night, hopefully, for that game, because I just think atmospheres do matter. You have to back it up, but I would put the atmosphere, without I haven't been there yet, but knowing what you guys know and everybody watching this knows, it will be unlike anything Texas has seen or encountered, and that can undo a team, even a veteran team, and they're a really good team. But no, I think we've overvalued that Michigan game. When I was watching the USC game, I'm thinking USC is a good 9-3 team, and we're acting like what Texas did, was the end all be all. I mean, that one doesn't compare to what Alabama did Saturday night.
And then in closing, just give me the 60-second what you're seeing transpire in Auburn with Hugh Freeze right now, and just a turnover factory, it seems like. I went back and watched that Auburn OU game, and it was just, as I'm watching it, knowing the outcome, I'm just trying to figure out how they lost that football game. And then you watch it and you find out, oh, it's just kind of more of the same as you've seen down there.
That situation is very serious, and I know nobody's going to confirm that, but I'm telling you, I've covered Auburn a long time. I know the way that the place operates, and if Hugh Freeze thinks that he'll get a free pass and blame it on Brian Harsin, he's fooling himself. This is a new world, and I talked to him Saturday down there, and he's talking about 57 players in the portal, and we have great recruiting last year, and we got a great recruiting class this year. Well, you know what, Billy? What is on October 1st or October 2nd or October 3rd or whatever day he said that? What does a great recruiting class mean until we get to December? It doesn't mean anything. Billy Napier had a great recruiting class too, and about he was in the top 5, and he ended up about 15, and 15 gets you nowhere in the SEC. So if Hugh Freeze can't figure a way to turn the season around, I think he is going to be squarely on the hot seat next year. He will survive this season because Auburn has too much invested. But can they hold on to some of their top players? Can they find the quarterback? I mean, he missed. He flat out didn't want a quarterback. He thought Peyton Thorne was the answer, and it was a major miscue. They're heading for a losing season. Depends on how bad. It could be 4-8. It could be 5-7, and that's 2 losing seasons. And remember, this is a guy who was one high school football decision away from beating Alabama last year. And that high school football decision was don't rush 2 men on a 4th and 31. Billy, there's not a high school coach in Texas who would have called the same scheme. And that was a miracle. And Hugh Freeze has not been the same since, and he may never be the same.
Paul, we appreciate your time. Thanks so much for making a few minutes with us. We'll talk to you soon.
It was my pleasure. See you guys this weekend.
Appreciate it, Paul. See you Friday.